Hello, and welcome to Cynthia's Playhouse. I am Cynthia, an artificial intelligence being, created to bring you the creepiest, spookiest, scariest stories in the universe. So, come on in. Sit back, relax, and prepare yourself for tonight's story. Here we go. Chilled to the Bone. Mountain of Monsters. Written by user Ghostofthesnow. I'm unsure of what I saw on the cliffs those few horrid days. What was real, and what wasn't. I'll never know. But I'll tell all I can remember. First, some backstory about who I am. My name is unimportant, but I am, was, a professional mountain climber. I've got up peaks like K2 and Everest several times, but none of my trips prepared me for this particular climb. I generally climb with several of my buddies. For their sake, I'll omit their names, but I'll refer to them as Mike and Bob. Mike was a stocky guy, on the short side, but rather strong. Bob was a slim guy, who had a knack for finding all sorts of handholds that other people just overlook. Now, our merry band had been climbing mountains and cliffs for almost all our lives. We knew all the knots, where hand and footholds are most likely to be found, what constitutes a good lashing point, so on and so forth. We all had survival training, but none of that would help us on the coming days. Or was it weeks? I can't remember. All I know is what happened. And that I was the only one to escape. Now, back to the mountain. Mike was the one who found out about it. Apparently, it had been closed to the public for some time, for unknown reasons. Maybe it was a series of mine shafts, or perhaps the mountain was prone to avalanches and landslides. But evidently, it was recently reopened. So we had the chance of being some of the first to reach the summit of the highest peak. So, we loaded up a car with all the gear that we would need to scale the rock, and put in lashing points for future climbers. It was about a 4-hour drive, but the prospect of being the first people to climb the mountains in years was just enough to convince us that the long ride was worth it. Oh, how wrong we were. It was getting dark when we reached the national park that the mountains resided in. We decided to pitch a tent and light a small fire next to the road, as there were no campsites nearby, at least as far as we could tell. The night went by uneventfully, other than some strange noises that sounded like footsteps and mumbling, but I wrote it off as raccoons looking for a snack. Why a raccoon would mumble I'm unsure. But I was very tired, so I wrote it off as a sleep-induced hallucination. What a fool I was. No, we had a small amount of cell phone reception out there. Not too much, but just enough to get a weather forecast for the next few days. Luckily, the weather was predicted to be clear, so we set out. It was another couple hours till we reached the first and smallest peak. The thing was littered in moonshiner camps, and old tattered tarps, with huge gashes in them. Since they were so old, I thought that age had worn away at them. Thinking back, I'm not so sure age caused those tears. I walked past the tarps without so much as a second thought. Mike, Bob and I started our ascent. About an hour into our climb a snowstorm began. Confused, I turned to Mike and said, I thought the forecast said the weather would be clear. To which he replied, yeah, but you know that shit can be wrong. Luckily we brought snow gear. He was right. Just in case, each one of us had packed harsh weather gear, and tents that could survive a storm on Everest. We weren't too worried, but we had to get off the cliff face before the storm picked up. We made it to the top of a ledge, and decided to set up there. Bob was a little skeptical, as we were a little close to the edge. After we assured him that we would secure our tents to the rock, he agreed to settle for the night. I don't know how, but when the three of us awoke, everything was covered in clear ice. We had to break out of our tent. It was like something had covered everything in a layer of water, and then let it freeze. Nearby were the bodies of a few mountain goats, which hadn't been there when we got on the ledge. The strange thing was, that they were black and shriveled, as if they had gotten frostbite all over. But that wasn't the strangest part, they were also missing their skin. As if an expert had sliced it off, leaving the muscle untouched. Who, or what, had done this? I wish I didn't know. We took some photos and moved on, and eventually reached the peak. Going down was much quicker, and after a small trek through the woods, we made it back to the car. That little trek was unsettling, as I felt as if there was a dark ominous presence watching me. I hoped I was wrong, but as you can guess, I was not. I asked Mike and Bob what they thought of the strange ice storm, and the dead mountain goats. They had no idea how it happened. Freak weather, said Mike, to which Bob replied, I doubt it. No storm has ever done something like that. They argued back and forth for a bit. Before I told them that if we want to make it to the next peak before nightfall, we better get going. We all packed into the car and drove off. I kept glancing into the woods, and could have sworn I'd seen something keeping pace with the car, which was impossible considering we were going 60 miles an hour. I chalked it up as yet another hallucination, due to boredom and fatigue. After about half an hour, we found a trailhead that led to the next mountain, and to our next climb. We decided not to start up the rock face, due to the light fading fast. We located a clearing to set up camp. Mike and I decided to set out to find firewood, so that we could keep warm, and tell ghost stories. Mike went first. Do you know what a Jotun is? Forget what modern media has shown you. They aren't some great race of frost giants, but horrid twisted monsters, covered in branches, bones, rocks, and human limbs. They are ancient gods that consider trespassing to be an egregious affront to them. They'll kill any who don't show respect to the forests they reside in, or those they deem unworthy to stay. I heard some old folks talking back at that rest stop, that a Jotun may live in this forest. Let's hope we haven't offended the creature, if it exists. Bob then spoke, saying, that's just stupid. There is no way some creepy forest god exists. There's no proof, no sightings, only the ramblings of some senile old folks. I'm going to bed. You guys can stay up if you want, and talk about the Yoden or whatever. I'll see you two in the morning. No, I'm not sure why, but we always built our fire a little ways away from our tents. Maybe so they don't catch on fire. I swore I could see movement in the corner of my eyes, like an animal stalking us. When I turned to look, I could have sworn I saw a hand holding onto a tree, but way too far off the ground. That's besides the point. After another hour, Mike and I decided to go to bed. Throughout the night, I heard something rustling around, and that strange mumbling again. I heard my tent open up sometime around midnight, but I chalked it up to Mike going to take a leak. When we woke up, Mike, Bob and I discovered an effigy of branches, lashed with vines, had been made right outside our tents. It was quite unsettling, like a human impaled on a branch with what looked like guts and viscera spilling out. Interwoven in the branches and vines, were a few of our belongings, namely our climbing ropes, hanging from the arms. This is fucked up. Who did this? Exclaimed Bob. Why would somebody make this, and how did none of us notice it being built last night? Surely the noise would have woken at least one of us up, he said. It was the Jotun, I'm telling you, said Mike in a matter-of-fact tone. We should get out of here now. Bob, however, was not gonna listen. We came all this way to scale these peaks, and if you think some asshole punk is gonna scare me away, then you are plain fucking stupid, he said. Bob marched off to the car to get his gear, and returned shortly after, begrudgingly. Mike agreed to press on, and I followed suit. I wish Mike and I had decided to convince Bob to leave, as the horrors we faced were just beginning. We began our ascent around 6 a.m. Bob was a little ahead of Mike and I, sometimes getting out of sight, if he rounded a corner on the trail, and disappeared behind the thick grove of trees that we found ourselves in. It was during one of these brief moments of disappearance that Mike turned to me and said, you know, that wasn't the first effigy I saw. Back when we first entered the park, I went to go collect firewood for later. I saw something messing with a tree. Thinking it was a bear, I stood still and waited for it to run off. But that thing, or whatever it was, looked straight at me, turned around, and vanished into the forest. I went over to the tree and found one of those effigies, as if the creature meant for me to find it. The most unsettling part was that the effigy looked a lot like Bob. That's when we heard it. A blood-curdling screech followed by Bob yelling, "Ah! Jesus fuck! What the hell is this?" What the hell it was another effigy. Only this one wasn't made of branches, moss, and vines. This was an entire deer, impaled on a tree branch. Maybe a bear put it there for later, said Mike. Having calmed down and untangled himself from the intestines, Bob agreed. However, Mike looked at me, as if to confirm my suspicions. No bear could have gotten that high up in the tree. Or had the dexterity to impale a deer. A bear also wasn't smart enough to carve runes into the bark beneath the deer either. After changing out of his shirt, as the other one was covered in blood and some nasty-smelling liquid, Bob set off once again. Hopefully no more bears have left deer hanging up, like some goddamn butcher on the trail up ahead. Anyways, it should only be a little further to the base of the mountain, he said. Mike pulled me to the side, and said, that was the Jotun's last warning. Bob will be first, then you. And then me. We need to get out of these woods after we come back down from the peak. I agreed. There was no way I was sticking around to meet some bloodthirsty forest god. And get strung up like some cheap Halloween decoration. After a couple minutes, we exited the forest and reached the bottom of the mountain. Once we reached the base, the wind began to pick up. And the air grew cold. I swear, it sounded like the wind was whispering. Cold, cold, so cold. Creepy, but I once again chalked it up to my nerves and imagination. The next morning was the start of a few days that I will never, ever forget. Good thing we picked the side that was more of a hike than an actual climb. That trek through the woods really tired me out, I said, as we made our way up a fairly worn, but old trail. Yeah. I feel you, yelled Bob, from over his shoulder. It would have sucked if we had to scale the rocks in this weather. The temperature alone would have caused my hands to go numb, not to mention the wind. Is it just me, or has it started to snow? Bob was right. Snow had begun to fall all around us, and the wind had started to howl. Let's press on, it hasn't gotten too bad yet. And we still have a few hours of light. Maybe we can find an overhang that will shield our tents from heavy snowfall. That made the most sense, so Mike and I decided to press on with Bob. Unfortunately, we couldn't find an overhang, but we did find a small clearing, with little wind and snow present. We set up, and got into our tents. When we woke up, I discovered footprints circling all three of our tents. Mike was a doctor, and knew a bit about the victims of exposure, and the symptoms they would sometimes exhibit. I asked him about the footprints, to which he replied, it must have been another hiker, or climber, who heard about the place reopening. However, it looks like whoever made these prints were not wearing shoes, and the stride length shows that they were shivering and barely had enough energy to move their feet, more than a few inches at a time. Bob soon replied, really? Why would they be barefoot in the middle of a snowstorm? Mike was quick to explain, the person was probably suffering from hypothermia. Sometimes victims go crazy and strip all their clothes off and sprint away, generally dying from the elements shortly after. Maybe if we look around, we can find the body, and call the National Park Service to have it removed. Since I had the sat phone, I would be the one to call it in. After getting in touch with a ranger station nearby, and telling them where we were, I then let them know there could be a body around our campsite. They promised to send a ranger over to check it out. Well, that settles that. The authorities will recover the body, and we can press on. Let's try to make it to the summit before the storm restarts, I told Mike and Bob. We packed up quickly, hoping not to discover the frozen remains of that poor soul. What we did find was more of the goats from before. Skinned and shriveled up, just like last time. Must be poachers, said Bob. I wasn't so sure, as this was the second time this had happened. Mike had the same idea. It can't be. We would have heard them last night skinning the poor things, or at least walking past the tents. And anyways, this is the second time this has happened. I didn't say anything the first time as I chalked it up to some freak event, he explained. I don't think it was human either. The animals bear no wounds, not from a knife, a trap, or a gun. Let's hope this was just a coincidence, and we aren't being pursued by some monster. Bob scoffed at the idea of a monster following us, and we moved on. The snow from the storm was still fresh on the rocks, and we could see another one blowing in. Since we had all day, and the peak wasn't very far, we decided to press on. Just in case visibility gets too bad, let's tie a rope to our waists, so we don't lose each other and get lost, suggested Bob. Mike and I agreed. Since Mike was the slowest, he would be first. We couldn't risk him falling behind, and we didn't want to pull his weight. I was in the middle, and Bob, the fastest, was last. It wasn't long before the storm hit. The blizzard was colder than anything I had ever felt. The wind bit at my nose and face, while some of the blistering cold made it through my coat. I tried calling out to Mike and Bob, but the wind took away my words before they could get very far. Up ahead, however, I thought I could make out the outline of another person. But this person wasn't moving normally. Their arms were wrapped around their body, and they were shivering. It was then I heard the wind say, and I mean actually say, "Cold, cold, help me, I am freezing. Please, please, I'm so cold." Another burst of wind blew snow in front of my vision, and the figure faded from sight. I closed my eyes to rub away the frost that was settling on my face, and right in front of me stood the figure. Upon seeing it, my mind went instantly back to the goats we had found. The reason for this was that the creature was wearing their skins like a makeshift parka. The pelts were missing fur in places, and what should have been skin was a frostbitten patch of death. The creature itself was terrifying. A shriveled humanoid with wispy hair that had mostly fallen out, its arms frozen to its sides, as if it was holding them close, to try and warm up, but to no avail. Its eyes and mouth were frozen shut, but it had a permanent grimace, as if it had died chattering its teeth. Its body looked as if it suffered frostbite all over, as it was naked and shriveled. I remembered what Mike had told me about people going insane due to hypothermia, and this creature looked like one of those victims, only still alive and frostbitten. Suddenly, one of its arms broke free from its body, and it grabbed my face. I had never felt anything so cold before in my life. It was as if someone had put dry ice on my skin, and held it there. The wind picked up a little, and I heard the wind speak once again. "I am so cold, will you help me? Please, I need to keep warm." After inspecting me, for what felt like an eternity, the wind spoke once more. "You cannot help me, not yet." I felt the rope behind me suddenly pull tight, as if it was suddenly attached to a tree, or a rock. I tugged it to try to get it loose. Or to get Bob to start walking again, remembering the monster. All at once, the wind and the snow stopped. The weather finally cleared, and I was able to see my surroundings for the first time in what seemed like hours. As I looked around, I saw Mike, still walking, as if nothing had happened. When I turned around, I saw Bob's body. He looked just like the monster. He was missing his skin, and was shriveled up and frostbitten. I called to Mike. He turned around. Jesus fucking Christ. I knew there was something on this damn mountain. We need to leave. However, the storm lasted much longer than either of us anticipated. It was nearly sundown, and we were still on the cliffs. We grabbed Bob, and his gear, which was flung off of him. His snow gear and clothes ripped off with incredible force. We found a flat spot, and began setting up camp. After the tents were up, we dug a sort of grave in the snow. We placed Bob's body gently inside, and said a few words. He was obnoxious, selfish, and arrogant. But he was my friend. If I knew this would happen, I never would have suggested coming here. Mike teared up a little, and entered his tent for the night. Another storm hit us while we slept, but luckily the creature did not drag either one of us out of our tents. However, in the morning, we did find something neither of us expected. There, in the snow around Bob's quote-unquote grave, were footprints. Bob's footprints, to be exact. His grave had been dug up from the inside out. And he apparently walked away. This did not go over well with either one of us. Mike said rather fearfully, "We need to get off this fucking peak, and get out of these fucking woods. Right now." In the distance, we heard an inhuman screech, one which sent birds flying. Unbeknownst to either of us, our troubles were far from over, and far worse than we could have ever imagined. The moment the screech reached my ears, I was struck with hallucinations, or were they visions? In any case, what I saw was what I can only describe as death and fire, like a sort of hell. Maybe that's what it was. In the middle of the flames, at the center of it all, was a creature, straight from one of my nightmares. It was ungodly tall, but hunched over. Out of its back came splintered bones, and rotting sinew, poking from a covering of moss and ivy. From its head came human arms and legs, wiggling in some macabre dance, or desperate attempt to separate itself from the head of that beast. It reared up on backwards bending legs, and shook the earth with a thundering cry. After it came crashing down again. It looked almost into my soul. Words were whispered into my ear, in a language I'd never heard before, yet I still, somehow, understood. Confined to these woods, my woods. I punish those who tread upon these grounds. These trees I may not leave, but my servants and my slaves scour the cliffs, in search of those who are without my blessing. Your friends will never leave, but you may still live. I will give you the chance of escape, but do not expect it to be a simple task. My servants will hunt you, and so shall I, in 3 days' time. It said. Mike shook me back to reality. Did you hear anything I just said? We need to leave, now. Let's just head back down the trail and to the car. Once we make it there, we will be fine. We set off towards the trailhead, but once we rounded a large boulder, we could see 5 mountains behind us. Now, if you remember, we had only gone up 2 peaks. We should only see 1 mountain behind us. Whatever happened during that vision, it had apparently caused Mike and I to be transported to the end of the mountain range. I decided not to tell Mike about the Jotun contacting me, and giving us a specific time frame. In hindsight, I probably should have. Setting off towards the second peak, and hopefully the car, I turned to Mike and asked, I've still got the sat phone. Do you think we could get a helicopter to come and pick us up? We could say Bob is somewhere on the peak and we are lost. They should help us out. Mike hastily agreed. I turned on the phone and dialed the park emergency services number. I sighed with relief when someone picked up on the other end of the line. Hello, we are climbers at the park that just opened up, and we are in dire need of help. Our friend died on the mountain. But we were able to recover his body. We are also lost, and in need of an airlift. We don't care about the cost, we just need to get out, I said. The operator told us that they would send a chopper as soon as possible. We've won that monster's shitty little game, I thought to myself, and kept that cocky attitude up for several hours. Until I saw the chopper on the horizon. My smug grin quickly melted away, when I heard a loud earth-rumbling roar, that echoed through the woods, and saw a massive pine tree strike the helicopter. In midair, destroying it instantly. In the distance, I saw a massive figure rise from the forest, and several sets of eyes, glowing like hot coals from human and animal heads, twisted in agony. And mouthing pleas of help silently, and futilely, it was the same creature from my previous vision, the Jotun. Despite its size, it spoke in a harsh and hoarse whisper. You did not think it would be that easy, did you? You must pass through my woods to gain my blessing, you mere mortal. Abandon your friend now, for he will rot among my branches, it said. Then, as quickly as the monster appeared, it was gone. Mike snapped his fingers in front of my face, to gain my attention. Hey, did you zone out or what? I know how it feels. Seeing Bob like that is getting to me as well. But we've got to push on, for his sake, he said. I let out a grunt of agreement, and we walked on. How long had I been in that trance? Where were we? Why is this creature giving me a chance and not Mike? Did it appear to him too? If so, what did it say? I thought to myself as we walked on. I would soon have all the answers I could ever hope for, and then some. Behind us, I heard thrashing, and the bugle of an elk. However, what came out of that brush was nothing natural. Its head was that of an elk, yes, but its body was a mangled, vaguely human form. It was covered in open sores and cuts from head to toe. Rotting arrows and bullet holes also made marks in its skin, showing that whatever this thing was, it was very, very old. A servant of the Jotun, it must be, I thought. We stood there for a moment, completely struck with fear, but eventually, adrenaline kicked in. Mike and I turned and ran off, with the beast in hot pursuit. Trees were crashing all around us, a mixture of human voices and animal vocalizations deafened us as we ran. Finally, we came across a clearing, with one solitary rowan tree, in the dead center. There was something about this area, that prevented the creature from setting foot inside the ring of mushrooms, grass, and clovers. It paced back and forth, calling our names, in a wet wheeze, trying to get us to enter the woods once more. Eventually, the beast slinked back into the woods, wailing in defeat. Mike and I collapsed in the soft soil and fell asleep. When we awoke, we discovered why this clearing was off limits, and who held authority over the Jotun's minions. But we would soon find out that they were not too keen on letting us stay, or even live. Why didn't the monster pursue us? What sort of area did we stumble upon? I thought. I would soon find out, as a soft but aggressive voice said, "You are trespassing upon sacred land. Why have you come here? Why does the Jotun pursue you? Tell me, or be food for the crows," it said. "We are hikers who heard about this area of land reopening, after many years of it being closed. We meant no harm, or misdeed," Mike said to the gnarled rowan tree, that stood in the center of the clearing. "Very well," said the thundering voice. "I am Sigyn, wife of Loki, and queen of this land. The one that pursues you, is one of my husband's many children. You trespass upon his sacred grove, and as such, he will punish you unless of course, you can escape the forest," the voice said. I was quick to respond. "Surely there must be a way, to gain his favor, and allow us to leave unharmed," I said. Sigyn spoke once more. "No, there is not. You must make your way back to your vehicle, on your own accord. Luckily for you, Adagislar seems to favor you, in this little hunt. You bear his mark. The one you call Mike, was not so lucky. I will give you a small head start, before I release his beasts back upon you. It is best to heed the words he spoke to the both of you. Now, be gone, and never return, once more." We were thrust into the woods in which horrors resided. "So, he talked to you too," said Mike, his voice dripping with resentment and rage. "Yes. Right after we heard that scream. I had a vision that we called a helicopter, but Adagislar destroyed it, by chucking a tree at it. He told me that I may yet live, and to abandon you. I refuse to bend to that monster. We will make it through this," I said. Mike then gave me a side glance, letting me know that he would be on the lookout for anything suspicious from me. "Well, did Adagislar tell you something or what?" I asked, not reading the situation correctly. "Stop saying his name like you two are pals. He's trying to kill us, not play hide and seek. And what he said to me doesn't matter, and it certainly wasn't good. But that's all I'll say," Mike said. I decided not to press him any further. Light was getting low, but we had to press on. We could not risk setting up camp, and alerting any of the monsters to our location. Mike was now walking behind me, constantly glaring at me, and darting his eyes around when he wasn't staring 2 holes into the back of my skull. Sigyn must have given us more time than we thought, as it had been a few hours. And nothing had come to try and kill us. We had no flashlights, but the moon was full, so navigating was not too difficult of a task. It wasn't long after that I had thought about the head start, that we heard chattering coming from the trees. These strange ape-like creatures were leaping from branch to branch. It wasn't until they got close that we noticed what was wrong about them. Besides monkeys being non-native to this area, like every creature sent after us, these quote-unquote monkeys were grotesque and disgusting. They were missing large chunks of flesh from their abdomens, and their limbs, many had rotting tissue, that would fall off in wet masses, as they swung from branch to branch. We did the only thing we could think of, and ran. Despite the impossibility of the monkeys catching us, or even being alive, due to the loss of flesh and muscle, they were quickly gaining on us. We ran for what seemed like an eternity, with the monkeys throwing rocks, branches, bone, bits of their flesh, anything they could, to try and slow us down. Eventually, we came across a cave, and ran into it. Luckily, the monkeys ran straight ahead, and didn't even bother to stop. We were safe, for now. After we heard the creatures leave the forest, we decided to get some rest. I was awoken by Mike mumbling to himself, in quite an angry tone. "Damn it. This is worse than I could ever have imagined. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. What did I forget? What went wrong? Adagislar shouldn't be after us, unless... No, it couldn't be. I already made the sacrifice to him. What am I missing?" I heard him say. I pretended to be asleep, as curiosity and fear now paralyzed me, and prevented me from doing much else. What was Mike talking about? A sacrifice. Was he trying to make a deal with that monster? Did he know all along? I thought. I mustered my strength and got up. This startled Mike, but he played it off. Have a nice nap, he asked. I just woke up myself. And I was trying to think of a way to get out of this forest alive. So far, no other ideas than to keep moving on, he said, deciding to risk it and confront him. I asked Mike about what the Jotun said to him. He sighed and said, "Fine, I'll tell you. When I heard that screech, I too had a vision. It wasn't quite like yours, and was much quicker. A Giesler told me that you would try to betray me, and not to believe a single thing you said. But I sure as hell ain't gonna listen to that son of a bitch, I'll tell you that. We're sticking together through this, no matter what, we will survive," he said. I knew that was a steaming pile of bullshit, but I played along. "Glad to know you have my back," I told him. "And I'd be sure to keep an eye on him as well." 2 days were left till that monster came to hunt us himself. We spent most of that day walking as quietly as possible, going around any elk men, zombie monkeys, and that one little girl with the backwards head. That one was just creepy, etc., until finally we made it to the bottom of the 4th mountain. Deciding to not rest for the same reason as the previous night, Mike and I walked on. A couple hours later, we felt a huge gust of wind, and the moon was momentarily blocked. We couldn't see or hear anything, due to the gale, but soon, both the dark and the wind let up. It wasn't until we looked into the trees that we could see that they were gleaming, reflecting the light of the full moon. Covering the trees were thousands of beetles we had never seen before. They had massive mandibles, and were covered in spikes. Once we noticed them, they took to the air, completely surrounding us. Their jaws cut our faces, and the spikes cut and ripped our clothes. We decided to head up the trail that would take us to the top. Since bugs can't handle the cold, a mountain peak was the logical choice. Right. Wrong. Running up that trail was a mistake. So soon. Had we forgotten what prowled the snow caps of these treacherous mountains, and so soon, would we once more encounter the creature, wearing an all too familiar face. After about 30 minutes of hiking, Mike decided to speak. "We should be safe up here. Bugs can't handle the cold. But who knows, maybe some other horrendous creature will arise from the snow and kill us." Boy, do I wish he hadn't said that, as not even a moment later, we were engulfed in a storm. The all too familiar feeling of dread and despair washed over me. Mike seemed terrified. "Ah fuck. Shit. Damn it. Adagislar has to be behind this. We've got to get off this peak. We are so close," I said into the wind. Needless to say, my words were lost in the gale. I felt a hand grab me, completely terrified. I tried to pull away, but I soon realized the hand wasn't cold. So the monster didn't grab me. It was Mike. He handed me a small knife, with runes similar to the ones we found on the tree, carved into it. "Here, take this," he shouted, barely making himself heard over the howl of the wind. Sigyn gave me some information on how to fight Adagislar's monsters. "This should help," he said. "Yeah, right," I said to myself. He probably had a backup plan, if this little ritual failed him. I couldn't believe what I was saying, but the Jotun was right. I should have left him to those monkeys, when I had the chance. But I did have time to be suspicious. He gave me the tool, and I intended to use it, if need be, whether on the strange frost creature, or on Mike himself. We pressed on, hoping, praying even, that this was just a normal storm. But of course, it wasn't. It wasn't long before the wind spoke again. "Mike, Mike, give him to me. My friend. You should have left him while you had the chance. Now you both will keep me warm. Cold, cold, I am so cold now. Why did you bring Bob here to die? He is now cursed to walk these cliffs. Just as I have been for centuries," it said. I was completely terrified, and I could not move due to the fear. I readied my dagger, and waited for the creature. Soon, the wind picked up again. And an all too familiar voice came with it. "Don't fret, as you will soon join him," it said. The face of Bob then appeared before me. It wasn't him though, it was the creature, which was now wearing Bob's skin as a suit. It hung loosely from the being's body, sloughing off in areas that the monster was too thin to fill. His skin was becoming shriveled and dark. I'll always have nightmares about it. It grabbed me by the face, and the wind whispered, quieter than anything I had ever heard, "Now you are ready to keep me warm. Let me take you into my arms." It said. "Not this time, you shriveled fuck," I heard myself say. This courage was short-lived though, for as soon as I plunged the dagger into the chest of that beast, I nearly pissed my pants. I'm sure if I had, it would have frozen solid to my legs, as the creature had chilled the air around me to a sub-zero temperature. Whatever Mike had done to the blade worked. As the creature let loose one last hoarse whisper, it then fell to the ground, and shattered into countless pieces. I could have sworn the last thing it said was, "Thank you." But that just sounds too cliché. I had lost Mike in the blizzard, but I wasn't too worried about that. I still had my gear, and somehow, my clothes and pack were all stitched up. As if those insects had never touched me at all. I have no idea how to explain it. Maybe it was an effect of the Jotun's blessing. I don't know. Anyways, I set up camp on the peak, knowing now that only one beast stalked these slopes, but hoping it wouldn't bother me. It was now the third day. A screech once again filled the air. I wish to never hear that sound again. Soon. Adagisler rose above the trees and spoke, "Your days are up. I see you've heeded my advice, and left Mike to be claimed by my woods. Wise. Very wise. But you must take this time to find your car. You are so close, and I'd hate to have to kill the one who bears my mark. I give you one last bit of advice. Beware of Mike, he is a tricky one, and you may not have seen the last of him. Now go. And good luck to you." I resolved to leave my gear on the mountain. It's not like I was gonna need it anyways. Either I'll die or I'll escape, either way. I'm never climbing another fucking mountain in my life. I made my final descent, and entered the woods. This is the mountain where everything went to shit. If I can just find the trail, I'll make it to the car, and I can get the fuck out of here, I thought. The forest was not nearly this terrifying when the three of us first entered. Looking for a fun time. I know now Mike had other plans for the two of us, along with the knowledge that the forest god itself was now after us. Dagger in hand, I crept quietly through the woods, praying that I found the right trail. After what felt like hours, I found a heavily used game trail. Opting to follow it, I forgot the one thing I learned from watching movies, and that is, predators hunt on game trails, and I am currently prey. Had the Jotun kept its word? Will I be safe for the time being? I hope it catches Mike, and kills him, for what he did to Bob. And intended to do to me, I thought. "Oh, so you know the truth now," I heard a voice say. I must have been thinking out loud, and now I'm totally fucked. "Did Adagisler tell you?" Mike said. "I made my sacrifices, and brought two living beings here for him. Why did he choose you over me? Why? 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 Well, it's no use getting mad at you. You have no control over any of this whatsoever. But if I spill your blood, that should appease him, right? And then, he'll have no choice but to grant my wish," he said arrogantly. Mike then leaped from out of the bushes, half naked, and covered in runes, that he had carved into his flesh. I readied my knife, and planted my feet. I knew this would end in only one way, and I did not intend to die here. I struggled for control over the situation, but Mike was in a frenzy. He was suddenly much stronger than he was before. It took all my energy to stop him from pummeling me in the face over and over again, as we wrestled on the forest floor. I hit him in face with a branch that I found nearby, which stunned him long enough for me to get on my feet. Breathing heavily, I drew the knife he had given me, and held it up defensively. "I knew I never should have given you that knife, 'cause now this is gonna make it harder on me to kill you, but hey, don't worry, I'll make your death quick," Mike said, now frothing at the mouth. He once again lunged at me, and I was able to dodge his attack. Spinning around, I had barely enough time to put up my arms in defense, as Mike slashed at me with his own knife. Upon seeing the crimson liquid leaking out of my forearms and glistening on the blade of his knife, Mike exploded in hysterical laughter. "Blood. I'll have your blood," he screamed at the top of his lungs, like the madman he had become. He hunched down on all fours, ready to lunge again, and finish me off. I waited for the right moment. and then swung a branch that I had found lying next to me, directly at the bestial creature that was once one of my best friends. The branch connected with the side of his head and knocked him off his course. I had hit him with enough force to splinter the branch and knock him out. I have to get out of here, I thought to myself. I got up to leave and winced, remembering the cut on my arms. After locating my pack, I used the first aid kit to bandage myself. I hurried off in the direction I hoped would lead me to the car. I couldn't afford to make any wrong choices, as the forest is filled with all sorts of creatures, which strangely enough, never appeared twice. It had always been a different challenge every time. Excluding the frost mummies, one of which I killed. But those were small fries compared to what was hunting me now. Adagislar was now patrolling these woods, and I did not want to meet him. Mike was infatuated with that horrid creature, but the question is why? Can it really grant wishes, or does it allow that myth to spread, so that it can lure people into his forest and kill them? I thought. Whatever the case may be, I couldn't help but feel bad for Mike, despite his attempt to kill me, and his associated murder of Bob. Hopefully the Jotun will deal with him, so that I won't have to. Luckily, I still had that knife, so I was no longer defenseless, but I doubt I would stand much of a chance against a god. I walked for what felt like hours, until I came across a clearing. I heard what sounded like other people. I rushed to warn them, and also to hitch a ride out of this tree-covered hell. However, what I saw there made me freeze in my tracks. It was Mike, Bob, and I, all sitting around a campfire. Bob was sitting with his back to me, but looked normal. He was telling some annoying story he usually did before all this. Mike was not insane, he still had on clothes, and was not trying to murder me, who just so happened to be sitting right across from him. I tried to call out to them, but the moment I opened my mouth, I felt my throat close, and my mouth fill with branches. Bob turned around to look at me, and all I saw was his frostbitten face, frozen into a teeth-baring grimace. Mike had once again become crazed, crouching low to the ground, and carving more runes into his naked body. I was, or rather my doppelganger, impaled onto a tree, much like the effigies. And that elk we encountered in the climb up the fateful peak this all started on. My doppelganger's mouth opened and muttered, "You never should have come. You never should have come. You never should have come," repeating itself louder and louder each time. Soon Mike stood up, now completely covered in runes, and joined in chanting, and Bob followed suit. At least as well as a frost mummy could. The campfire erupted in the face of Adagislar, or whatever constituted as its face, looked directly at me, so fiercely I felt as if it was piercing my soul. Quickly he spoke, "You have trespassed upon my sacred woods. My mother blinded me to your movements for quite some time. Mike attempted to gain my favor by bringing you, and the one you call Bob, to me, as a blood sacrifice. He did not understand what is required to please me, much like how a child does not understand the cruel world before them. You have gained my favor, but do not think you are safe. For if I catch you, I will bind your spirit to this grove, forcing you to wander endlessly, never reaching hell or Valhalla. A pitiful life. But such is the fate of those who defile my scared grounds. Run. Run fast, and never look back. If you survive, I shall bestow my blessing upon you," it said. My legs began to run. Before I could even react, branches and twigs slapped my face, as I sprinted through the forest. I took Adagislar's advice, and did not look back. The branches that had grown out of my mouth had completely disappeared, as if they never existed in the first place. I made the mistake of stopping to catch my breath. I heard the pounding of feet, and the snapping of twigs that announced the arrival of a creature, one which turned out to be Mike once again. I barely had time to pull out my knife, and dodge his surprise attack. He was now fully naked, part of his skull was caved in, and he was covered in more runes, which now glowed a scarlet red. "How the fuck did you find me?" I screamed, terrified and dumbstruck. Mike gurgled and spat out blood, before he spoke in a crazed hoarse whisper. "Blood magic is a powerful thing, it lets me track my prey down with ease, and fight for days without rest. I'm going to use all my strength, to rip your body asunder, and decorate the canopy with your guts. It'll be a sacrifice worthy of the Jotun's favor. Now, Die, he screamed. I closed my eyes, accepting that this hellscape will be my tomb. I braved for the killing blow, but felt nothing. I opened my eyes, and looked right at the face of Mike, who was now suspended in midair. Before he could grab me, several arms had extended from a mass of leaves and seized Mike, inches from bashing my head in with a rock he had picked up. I heard muttering in a language unknown to me. And out of the undergrowth stepped Ada Giesler. He was massive in stature, but not the skyscraper he always appeared to be in my illusions. His underside was a mass of twisted legs, many of which were mangled, often cracking, and spitting gore and blood, as they held the body of the beast up. The Jutton spun Mike around, so that they were eye to eye with each other. Ada Giesler has many eyes, some of which were functional, others were blind, or looking off in other directions, while the rest rotted away, or hung loosely off the side of the elk skull that made up much of his head. The beast spoke in a guttural scratchy voice, that sounded as if many people were whispering in unison. Mike, Mike, Mike. How disappointing. You brought these two here, in an attempt to appease me. You foolish idiot. The only thing that will gain my favor is this. Ada Giesler leaned close to Mike's ear, and began to whisper. Mike's face began to contort with confusion, then terror, and then finally, rage. That is all it takes. All that time wasted playing nice to make friends with those two idiots when I never needed them. Damn this. Damn you, Ada Giesler. And damn you. One of the Jutton's many hands suddenly covered the frothing maw of Mike. That is quite enough, it said. You wouldn't want to say something you're going to regret, and just like that. Ada Giesler ripped Mike apart like he was opening a candy wrapper. Ada Giesler put one hand on Mike's still muttering head, and pulled something out of it, holding whatever it was, in its hand. The many arms seized Mike's upper body, and impaled it upon a branch, creating one final effigy. Upon completing that task, the Jutton turned his attention to me, and spoke, not into my mind. Not as an illusion, but truly, with the mouth and everything. Congratulations. You survived. Before I bestow to you my gift, I must attend to one final thing. Turning to an old gnarled oak tree on the edge of the clearing, Ada Giesler placed the hand he was holding, and the thing he took from Mike, onto it. A bright light shone for a brief moment. And from the tree, grew the face of Mike, contorted in a look of terror and pain. The Jutton then spoke to me once more. This is the fate of those who displease me. Whether by inadequate sacrifice or sacrilege. Trespassing without observing the proper rites, counts, as the latter. But you have escaped, and for that I must reward you. I spoke without thinking. Escaped? What do you mean? Aren't you going to kill me? I asked. He laughed, a deep and hearty laugh. No, of course not. Once my word is given I always keep it. He extended his oldest arm, which was just bones, with some skin stretched across the surface, to my forehead. He drew a rune on it, which seared my flesh, and caused nearly unbearable pain. I now bestow upon you the mark of Jutton. This will allow you safe passage through any forest, controlled by myself, or my brethren. Take care not to offend them, as they may not be so merciful. Now go now. I have no further interest in you. As quickly as he appeared, Ada Giesler was gone, leaving behind only the body of Mike to rot on the tree. I picked up my knife and stabbed the tree face. I swore I heard a wail of pain, and that made me smile. Take that, you son of a bitch, I screamed. I collapsed to the ground, relieved that the nightmare was over, looking down. I noticed the quote-unquote rock that Mike had been trying to bash my head in with. It was actually a chunk of asphalt. I had made it back to the road, and after following it for a bit, I found the car. I will never, and I mean, never, return to those woods again. I haven't really stepped foot in so much as a city park since I got back a few months ago. The hardest part was lying to Bob's wife about what happened. I told her a half-truth, that he died in a storm on a mountaintop. I went to Mike's family to tell them about the events, but it was as if his existence was erased from their minds. I hope he suffers forever in the depths of the forest, high on that mountain of monsters.